Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to today's show. We're coming up on mid-April, which means I'm going to be talking all about the full moon in Libra, which is happening on the weekend of April 12th and 13th. Depending on where you are in the world, it could be the afternoon of the 12th or the morning of the 13th. Either way, we're all going to experience this big, bright full moon in Libra on the night of April 12th. And generally speaking, this is a very lovely, very sweet full moon that has a lot to offer us. There is a little bit of an edge to this full moon in Libra, so I'm calling this the bitter and the sweet full moon. It's mostly sweet, but there is a little bit of bitter in the mix. So in today's show, I want to take you through all the qualities and planetary influences that are active under this full moon. Maybe not all of them, but the main ones, I should say. I also wanted to just bring up, which I know I often say in full moon shows, but for those of you who might be joining us for the first time or long-time listeners that need a little reminder, the energy of the full moon lingers beyond the day of the full moon itself. And in fact, the energy of the full moon will influence the undertone of energy for about 2 weeks until we have the next lunation. And so that means that these full moon themes that are becoming active around the full moon on the 12th or 13th of April will continue to influence events and experiences until the new moon in Taurus on the 27th. So these qualities of this full moon in Libra will be most obvious and most in effect around the 12th and 13th on the full moon itself, but they do continue to sort of permeate life and influence our choices, our thinking, our interactions with others right through until the 27th. So you can kind of think of the full moon in Libra as influencing us from the 12th to the 27th of April. Before we dive into all of those full moon themes, I wanted to let you know about my new webinar, which is happening live on April 12th. I'm going to be teaching on ancient timing. And what I'm going to do is take students through 2 very accessible ancient timing tools. We're going to be working with the minor periods of the planets and the ascensional times of the signs. So if you're curious to learn more about timing in astrology, I hope that you can join us. These techniques are likely much easier than you expect to use. I usually say to students that if you can add and subtract, you can use these techniques. So if you are interested to join us, you can sign up for the webinar via my website, kellysastrology.com. If you're listening to this after the 12th, pop over to the website where you can register for the recording, the slide files, the video to get all the info. Of course, we will leave the direct link to the webinar in the show notes below as well. Okay, so let's get back to this gorgeous Libra full moon. It is so nice as well to have a pretty lovely lunation after we come out of eclipse season. So the details of the full moon, it is at 23 Libra. It is ruled by Venus, and Venus will be in Pisces at the time of the full moon. So straight away, there's this like Libra-Venus-Pisces theme, which evokes qualities of peace and negotiation, of consideration, of compassion, a little bit to do with love and affection, and a little bit to do with art and beauty, which are all part of the Venus, set of qualities, the Venus archetype, if you like. Now, Libra itself as a sign is especially focused on fairness, on compromise, on integrity, on ethics, on kind of that sort of the idealized spirit of the law as this sort of fair and just thing. And so with Libra emphasized by its once a year full moon, we can certainly expect all of those Libra themes to be front and center on this second weekend in April. You might notice these themes about fairness and compromise coming up in your personal life, in your relationships, your friendships, your connections with family, just in your own thinking. We may see this collectively in terms of world events or news headlines and things like that as well. So this second weekend of April is sort of under the auspices of this full moon in Libra. Now, with the full moon being ruled by Venus, which the full moon in Libra is always ruled by Venus, but Venus can be in a few different places, a few different signs at this time of year. So this is a very particular type of full moon in Libra. It's the Venus in Pisces version of the full moon in Libra. And so, with the full moon being ruled by Venus, who is in her exaltation sign of Pisces, one of the three best signs for Venus to be able to do her most Venusian kind of work in the world, there is this sense under this full moon of raising up or elevating these Venusian and these Libra themes. And so, this might include things like honoring rest or soulful experiences. Prioritizing quality time with important people, that partnership, interactive, kind of connected, focused side of Venus. It can be about valuing the need for support for those that are in need, if you like, particularly with one of the iterations of Venus here being Venus in Pisces. There is a lot of sensitivity to suffering that Venus in Pisces holds. And so under this full moon, we're sort of really raising up that idea of, oh yeah, it is good to think about how to support those that need a little bit of extra help. We could also have themes that might highlight the importance of caring for your feelings and your heart, for prioritizing that emotional or sensitive side of you as a being or of the situations that you're in, given that ultimately we end up with Venus in a water sign here. Libra as an air sign and Pisces as a water sign, one connective quality or a quality in common that air and water signs have is the wet, moist quality. And that means air and water signs are very much about connections and about interactions, about figuring out how to come together. And that general spirit of how do we come together? How can we come together in a way that's safe for us all, that is nourishing for us all, or that is sustainable and long lasting? Whether that's in a friendship, whether that's a group setting, there's so many ways you could apply that. But how do we come together in ways that work for all could be an underlying message of this full moon. With this full moon ruled by Venus in her exaltation sign of Pisces, we might also see this idea of that raising up or elevating support for the arts, support for beauty in our lives, prioritizing the chance for more pleasure and joy. So what I've touched on here is a real mix of some Libra themes, some Pisces themes, but really at the heart of it is activating the archetype of Venus, which is so strongly emphasized for a number of reasons on this second weekend in April. I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute. So there is more to say about Venus and this full moon, but before we get there, let's touch on the bitter edge of this full moon, and that means we're going to be touching on Mars. So maybe a better word for Mars would be spicy. Maybe it's the spicy and sweet full moon. I always think of that heat of spice as being a Mars thing. But when I first thought about this full moon, I thought about bitter to go with the sweet. Bitter is more of a Saturn thing, but we're going to come to Saturn in just a moment. Before we do, let's talk about Mars. So the full moon is at 23 Libra and Mars is at 27 Cancer, which means the full moon is making a square aspect, one of our more fractious, dynamic, high energy aspects, which is about adjustment. And so that square aspect with the full moon at 23 Libra and Mars at 27 Cancer, so about 4 degrees apart. So we need about 6 to 8 hours after the full moon becomes exact for the peak of that moon square Mars aspect. But essentially within the hours following the exact full moon, we are going to have that moon square Mars aspect. And this is going to bring that kind of bitter, spicy, sharp quality forward. That square to Mars is where we get, like the thorn in the side or the fly in the honey kind of thing. This Libra full moon, which is really maybe pushing for peace or consideration and fairness, is having to negotiate or interact with a kind of emotionally reactive Mars. So the Libra full moon is kind of like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to amplify. This is what I'm trying to bring forward. And then we've got this square from Mars, which is like, what about this? Or this hasn't been resolved yet. Or I'm upset about something and we can't go forward until that gets addressed. So we might think about this Mars in Cancer in relation to its square to the full moon as a kind of pain point, like a hurt or a tenderness that might be ignored. So that can represent a complication in an otherwise sweet situation. And it's probably a complication that requires some pretty careful handling. So if you find yourself, going into a kind of enjoyable experience that you're looking forward to, just be aware that there is this little bit of tenderness or emotionally reactive energy. It could be yours, it could be somebody else's, it might be just part of the dynamic that is coming up. It is in the mix for this full moon. So when we have a square to Mars, we do get this reactive and sometimes a little bit of a volatile quality coming forward. The square aspect itself is of the nature of Mars. So there is a lot of heat in a square aspect. And then when we add Mars into the mix, we get this sort of sense of urgency. Sometimes it's a false sense of urgency, but it can be this sense of, I'm feeling so uncomfortable that I've got to do something. I've got to do almost anything. And so in this case, with the full moon bringing emotions and ideas and wishes to the surface, square to Mars, we might get these angry bursts of feeling, like you blurt something out. There may be this reactive expression of emotion, like I can't contain myself anymore, or this has been annoying me for a while and I've not said anything, and it just all comes out. A little bit like, you just blurt out about either a perceived or a real hurt, or maybe a wound that you've been holding on to. We know that Mars is in Cancer. We know that Cancer is a sign that has a deep connection to the past. So something that comes out under this full moon in Libra square Mars in Cancer, it may be related to a current event, but it might be tied to something from the past. It could be from 3 or 4 months ago. It could be from even longer in the past. And so we're clearing things out, if you like, with this full moon square Mars. What we want to be careful of or mindful of is taking out our pain and discomfort on those that are closest to us. And of course, there's lots of, psychological reasoning about why that happens. We often express ourselves most genuinely to the people that we feel safest with, which means they take all of our messy emotions. And what we're thinking a lot about when we have such an emotionally charged Mars in the mix is we're thinking about how do we handle our hurt, our anger, our rage. Do we as adults, because that's, what I presume all of you listening are, do we have some capacity to regulate, to be aware of our response, to care for ourselves in the having of that response, but then to allow us to work through our reaction to something before responding to the situation. And so there's a lot that we can all be practicing about our own emotional regulation under this full moon square Mars. So if you get really activated or charged, this is going to be a chance to do some healing about a very tender or vulnerable piece of you or your history. And one thing that a moon square Mars aspect like this can help with is really bringing hidden things out into the open or helping kind of surface up unconscious emotions. So something has been like swirling inside you, you haven't been able to get clear on it, you're out of sorts about it. And under the full moon, maybe there is that bursting forward or that, oh my God, it's this, this is what's annoying me, or that situation, or I didn't have a say, or I didn't get to choose what I wanted. And we want to be really aware of that so we can work with it, if you like. So a moon square Mars aspect is about bringing everything out in the open, putting it all on the table, and it can be bumpy. There's friction there, isn't there? There's that sort of fractious energy. Oh, I didn't like this. Oh, I didn't like that. Those disagreements that you get into with people that you have loved deeply for a long time. And we're just figuring out how to bring things out in the open without harming each other along the way. One of the things about this kind of bumpy full moon square Mars energy is that no one's holding back anymore. So we're getting it out in the open. It could be messy, it could be bumpy. We've got tenderness, we've got a little bit of that sharp edge, but now we're going to figure it out. And ideally, we're going to figure it out together. And that's what this Venus-ruled full moon is ultimately about, I believe. A little bit more on Mars, and then we'll circle back to Venus. So as Mars is, stirring things up, stirring up tender and uncomfortable feelings, it might draw you back into old dynamics, patterns from the past. And we don't want to get stuck there, but it might give us the chance for some healing, some resolution, maybe even some release about something that you've been holding on to. Being aware of what is activating you or noticing what is setting you off can really help draw your attention to an unexpressed need or remind you of a hurt that needs a little bit of healing, a little bit of loving attention. Almost like, if you're working with a young child, any of you who've raised kids or like me are lucky enough to be an auntie or an uncle to young children, where you know that sometimes their emotions just overwhelm them. They have these big feelings. And what we are trying to do is like figure out how to bring that like upset in a toddler part of us to the surface. What are you upset about? What didn't you get that you wanted? When you're talking to a young child who's upset, you're using very simple language, very basic concepts. And often we are just needing the feeling to be attended to. And that's what I think this full moon square Mars in Cancer has a lot to do with, is what uncomfortable feelings have I been neglecting that, if nothing else, I need to acknowledge within myself. And I know it seems like it does nothing, but it does a huge thing for your insides to say, I acknowledge that you don't want to be in this situation, that you don't like this person, that you really didn't want to do that thing. And that's how you bring self-awareness into your conscious mind. So there's a lot that we can do with emotional healing, emotional progress, emotional growth as individuals with this full moon square Mars. So with this full moon square Mars, we could say that this is an invitation to be bold about something that you've been insecure about in the past, to advocate for something that needs more protection and care, something of yours or something or someone that you care about. It might be that you push for that discussion that you know you need to have, even though it's going to be tender and maybe at times to make your way through it. There's a little bit of that bold, courageous energy of Mars, which is like, this is mucky, this is tender, it's uncomfortable, but we need to wade through it. So that's the Mars piece. Whether we call it bitter or spicy or just sharp and tender, there's a lot we can work with there. I did tell you I wanted to say a few more things about Venus. We talked about Venus being the ruler of the full moon, Venus being in her exaltation place, and how we want to raise up all kinds of expressions of Venus in our life: beauty, ease, pleasure, connection, affection, sweetness, relaxation, all of those Venusian qualities. But there are a couple of other things about Venus worth knowing in regards to Venus and, of course, her connection to this full moon. So this second weekend in April is actually really important for Venus for another reason altogether, and that's because Venus is going to end her retrograde on the same day as the full moon. Venus is stationing direct. So if you're in Canada and the US, the full moon and the Venus station direct are on Saturday. If you're in Canada and the UK and Australia, the full moon and the Venus station direct are on Sunday, the 13th. So we have the full moon in Libra ruled by Venus, but just by magical coincidence, we also have Venus stationing direct. So Venus retrograde ends, which is wonderful. There's been, the last 6 weeks since the very start of March, Venus has been in her review, reverse, going backwards, going over phase, and that comes to an end now. Venus is pivoting in place and starting to refocus on the future, facing forward now. We're willing to kind of leave some things behind us. And that's why so much of that full moon square Mars in Cancer has a lot to do with making peace or leaving behind stuff from the past. So this full moon, which is big, bright lunar energy, it's ruled by Venus, but the moon is kind of animating or lighting up the sky that is so full of Venusian energy. If you're a morning riser, if you're someone who's up early, Venus is going to be super bright in the sky before sunrise. She is really far from the sun right now, which gives her a lot of brightness on her own. And so if you're up before sunrise, take a look to the eastern sky and you will be able to see, like, Venus looks like that twinkle, twinkle little star. The song we all used to sing as children, Venus is the planet that really looks like the star that we're all singing about. So Venus is standing still, she's shifting perspective, she is turning her attention towards the future. under the bright light of this full moon. So there's a lot of light under a sky like this. There's the light of the full moon and the light of Venus. This is lunar light, or the light of the night. This is the light of the feminine. It is the light of insight, of working, like pulling wisdom from the more intangible places. It's that instinctive, felt kind of knowing coming forward really strongly. If you've got a big decision to make, I'd give yourself the full moon plus about 24 hours, and you may find that you settle into a place of knowing or instinctive, like that's the right option, that's not the right choice. As Venus stations, she's hovering very close to Saturn in Pisces. Now, Saturn and Venus are hanging out together all month, all of April. And as Venus stations direct, she's now going to move towards Saturn for the third and final time. So this is where we get another signature about bringing something to a conclusion. The full moon square Mars in Cancer, this is the last major thing activating Mars in Cancer before it leaves Cancer for good. So it's like we're finishing something up there. We're leaving the past behind. We're healing it, resolving it, releasing it. We're not taking it forward. And now Venus, the ruler of the full moon, is stationing direct. She's shifting perspective, and she's doing it through a negotiation with Saturn. And there's a lot that's going to bring forward. So what I want to say about Venus Saturn before we get into the meaning, the third and final Venus conjunct Saturn aspect is the 24th or 25th, depending on where you are. So April 24th or 25th, Venus will come to meet Saturn for the third and final time. Watch that date as an important transition around events that come up under the full moon. So the full moon brings things forward. We've got insight, feeling, we're doing some healing, recovery, and connection. And we're also starting to get some clarity. And that April 24th, 25th Venus-Saturn conjunction is sort of putting a full stop. I've made my choice. This is what I dedicate myself to. This is what I'm withdrawing myself from. It's a mix of those two kinds of things. Because Venus and Saturn really does bring forward this mix of qualities. It can bring clarity and realizations. Oh, I see it. I understand it. I know it. Venus-Saturn can highlight where dedication and devotion will be well-deserved. Like, yes, I'm going to devote myself to this. But Venus-Saturn can also help you understand something that is coming to an end point. Could be like a natural or an organic transition or end point. But with Venus-Saturn, we get this mix of I commit to this, I'm in it, all in, and I'm out of this. So I really want you to think about those choices of what you are devoting yourself to and what you are removing yourself from. So Venus with Saturn can be this mix of renewed commitment as well as necessary endings. So I know people get very excited about what they're going to commit to, but it's almost a trade-off. What are you ending so that you can commit to the thing that you want to commit to? Your energy, your time, your capacity is finite. This is the message that Saturn teaches us. I do not have capacity for all things all the time. That's a message that I know I have to remind myself of, and it's good for all of you just to get that little reminder. And so if you don't have unlimited capacity, what will you choose to devote your capacity to? And by the choosing towards something, it means, and it's good to be really clear and actually say it out loud, I'm not doing this now because now I'm doing that. Doesn't have to be a permanent forever always, but it's the choices for now that are really important. Now, Venus conjunct Saturn can also help stabilize events. This is a kind of binding aspect that says if we're locking in, we might as well write it in stone because we are locked in for the long term. So this Venus-Saturn energy, we're turning away from some things and we're really saying, at this point in time, I want to go towards this or that. And there's a very genuine sense of commitment that we can connect into, we can tap into, and we can draw on to help us with our commitments. Venus-Saturn aspects also highlight the importance of quality over quantity. So if you're unsure, think less is more and opt for quality with people and priorities rather than spreading yourself thin and not being able to give your all to anyone. If that's you, that's a clue that you need to kind of embrace that less is more, or quality rather than quantity. And so that gives you hopefully a really holistic look at this full moon in Libra, which is mostly sweet, but a little bit bitter, maybe a little bit spicy. I'd really love to hear how this full moon is showing up for you. Let me know your experiences in the comments. Are you enjoying the sweet connections and enjoyment of the full moon ruled by Venus in Pisces? Or are you kind of working through something tender but necessary via that square to Mars in Cancer? Maybe it's a little bit of both. If you're interested to learn about ancient timing, I hope to see you in the webinar. Until next time, everyone, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate if you are enjoying the podcast. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, following along, hitting that bell on YouTube, maybe leaving a review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. All of those things help other people find out about the podcast. So I really appreciate you being here on this journey with me. We are almost at 2 years of the podcast. So it's just, a fun experience that I'm enjoying. And I so appreciate that so many of you are willing to come along with me. Take care. Enjoy the full moon. Let me know how it's going for you in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye.